All right. Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise, honor, and glory to YAHAWAH, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of great millstone that taught us his truth. And salutations to the hopeful elect that's around the four corners of the globe. And the elect begins with 144,000. YAHAWAH, who the world ignorantly calls God and Jehovah. BAHASHAM is in the name. YAHAWASHI, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. The Rakak with Doctrine, the Holy Spirit. I'm our brother Iwalumia with the gym at Chicago, camp out here in Chicago. Come back at you, brothers and sisters of the household of faith of the Hopeful Right Select with another lesson. And Lord willing, I hope this lesson be edifying through the spirit and power of YAHAWASHI. Once again, I hope this lesson is edifying. I'm gonna just and simply entitle this lesson, racial tensions at an all-time high. And Jacob versus Esau, because ultimately, as you can, if you've been living under a rock, ultimately, in light of the Nolan Whale situation. There's been some Issacharites being killed by ICE. Ultimately Esau Edom is coming down heavy. As it says in Revelation 12, he's going to come down with great wrath, knowing that he had but a short time. But even a lot of these average Edomites out here is basically putting their foot in Jake's ass, man. And Jake is ultimately, because this is what the spirit of the Lord is putting in the earth. With these, said events that's happening, ultimately, Jake being killed unjustly by Edomites, whether it be cops, in the light of the Nolan Whale situation, whether it be regular Edomites, putting Jake to death, the Lord is ultimately stirring up the spirit of a race war, man. And this is what we're seeing right now. And all this is biblical, man. Ultimately Esau Edom putting, their foot in Jake's ass, man. Ultimately, YAHAWASHI is going to ultimately rouse Jake up to go against Esau, man. Both southern and northern kingdom, because as you can see, it's not no coincidence that ultimately both the southern and the northern kingdom, and with Jake's being killed ultimately at the same time, man. And this is all, the judgments of YAHAWASHI to get Jake roused up to come up against Esau, man. But this is the book of Matthew 24. See if I can actually start up. This is the book of Matthew 24 and 6. And ye shall hear wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in diverse places. Right? It says nation against nation, man. You're going to have what? The nation of Israel versus the nation of Edom. And ultimately, ever since going back to what's that, Genesis, the 25th chapter, man. How ultimately, when let me just grab it. Ultimately going back to the birth of Jacob and Esau, man, it was always a constant war, man. Ultimately, even inside the womb, you ultimately had Esau always, had that enmity, the enmity between the two, as it says in Genesis the 3rd chapter, man. But this is the book of Genesis 25 and 21. And Isaac entreated Yahweh for his wife, because she was barren, and Yahweh was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Yahweh. Verse 23, it says, and Yahweh said unto her, two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So with inside the womb, man, they were ultimately fighting, man. And that ultimately gives the characteristics of both. If you could continue to read Genesis the 25th chapter, man. It says, one came out red all over like a hairy garment. But the point being that ultimately inside the womb, it was a conflict, man. Even into this very day, as we approach the end of this man's society, racial tensions is at an all-time high. I believe you just had a Klan marching, in Washington, D.C. a few weeks back. So Esau Edom is showing his horns, man. You're finding Jake's, to this very day, man, being lynched from trees. From these said situations, whether you look on Twitter, what you look on Instagram, Facebook, whatever the case may be, you seeing Jake being roused up by these said atrocities that's happening to him. So ultimately what the Lord is doing, he's putting the spirit on Jake, to come up against this damn devil, man. Let's actually grab this in Genesis 49 and 9. This is the book of Genesis 49 and verse 8. Judah represents the Negroes, the so-called African Americans, but Judah can also represent the southern kingdom. Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. And who are our enemies? And our number one adversary being the Edomites. You know, we have many enemies, man. Like I said before, you know, the Edomites, the so-called white man, being our number one enemy. But we have many enemies. All these other nations are our enemies, man. Whether it be the Edomites, the Elamites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Ishmaelites. And ultimately, when this race will finally do kick off, hey, just best believe, hey, a lot of these other nations are going to be, destroyed by Jake also, man. You know, because what? The Lord is going to put a fear spirit on Jake to ultimately what? To get in their enemy's ass, man. Verse 8, it says, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be at the neck of thy enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Because, you know, you have all the other tribes that look up, to Judah, man. And Judah represents the African Americans. Because ultimately, when Judah makes a move, man, you know, the other tribes are going to make a move also, man. Because just look at the, I believe it was the LA riots, you know, when Rodney King, you know, when they let those cops off from the Rodney King trial. You know, ultimately, you know, you had Judah rioting, but who was ultimately beside them, man? You had Issachar. You know, I believe you had a little bit of Asher out there too, man. You know, ultimately rioting with Judah. You know, the so-called African Americans. Ultimately, what? You know, was a scene in the LA riots how ultimately it was an Edomite that was pulled out of a truck and ultimately smashed with a brick, man. But this time around, hey, the racial tensions are higher than they were ever before, man. It says, verse 9, it says, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion and as an old lion, because if you look at an old lion doesn't want to do anything. An old lion isn't as active as a young lion, man. You look throughout history, man, Jake will be roused up and then Jake will go back to sleep. Jake will be roused up, then Jake will go back to sleep. It says, who shall rouse him up? And it's ultimately YAHAWASHI that's going to rouse Judah up, man. And once Judah get roused up, hey, all the other 11 tribes is going to be roused up also, man. But that ultimately begins with Judah. When Judah makes that first, move, man, hey, the other tribes are going to follow suit, man. Because ultimately everybody follows the vibration. You know, the other tribes follow the vibration of Judah, man. So when Judah, starts to attack the enemies, hey, you're going to best believe the other 11 tribes is going to follow suit, man. And this is what everything is heading towards, man. You have the Northern Kingdom being killed by ICE, man. You know, in the light of this Nolan Wales situation, I believe they're trying to take it to trial. You know, but ultimately, hey, the racial tensions at an all-time high. You had an Edomite, several Edomites that came online, ultimately mocking the situation and things like that, which is going to only add more fuel to the fire, man. You know? But let's continue. This is the book of Micah 5 and verse 7. And the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people, as a dew from Yahawah, as the showers upon the grass that tarrieth not for man, nor waiteth for the sons of men. Because ultimately, the elect is going to eventually be given that spiritual power. The elect is going to be risen up to ultimately to hunt down the enemies also, man. It says, verse 8, it says, and the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles in the midst of many people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest, as a young lion among the flocks of the sheep, who, if he go through, both treadeth down and teareth in pieces, and none can deliver. And that's what's ultimately going to happen, to our enemies, man. Because the Lord is ultimately going to endow his elect men, with that spiritual power. But the Lord is ultimately, in these times, for that race, where the Lord is going to rouse up, 2/3 of these niggas out here, man. These Mexicans, hey, the Lord is going to bring the tribes together and ultimately what? To do damage, man. It says, thine hand shall be lifted up upon thine adversaries, and all thy enemies shall be cut off, man. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Like I mentioned before, racial tensions is at an all-time high, man. Esau Edom is showing his horns. The Lord is bringing the 12 tribes together, man. On the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, you're going to have these 2/3, basically join up to put a foot in Esau's ass. But you're going to ultimately have the elect. The Lord is going to endow his elect with spiritual power to get busy, man. Let's continue. This is the book of Zechariah 9 and verse 13. When I have been Judah for me, right, Judah, like I mentioned before, Judah represents the African Americans, but Judah also represents what? The southern kingdom, man. Both Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. For me, fill the bow with Ephraim, right? Ephraim represents what? The Puerto Ricans, which is the head tribe of the northern kingdom. But ultimately, Ephraim also represents what? The northern kingdom. When it says Judah and Israel, it's ultimately talking about what? Both the southern and the northern kingdom. And raise up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece, and made thee as a sword of a mighty man, because there's going to be a race war within the land, man. You know, you're going to have Edomites, you know, ultimately, you know, put their foot more into Jake's ass, man. But you're ultimately what? You're going to have YAHAWASHI put the spirit on Jake, hey, to ultimately put a foot in their ass, man. You know, because Jake has been being killed unjustly in this land for over what? 500 years, man, beginning with the northern kingdom. And the Lord shall be seen over them, and his arrow shall go forth as the lightning, and the Lord power shall blow the trumpet, and shall go with the whirlwinds of the south. So ultimately what? The Lord is going to put a fierce spirit on Jake to get busy out here on the enemies, man. You know? But let's actually grab this last one. You know, just a few scriptures that came to mind. You know, it's going to be a race war in the land, man. And ultimately what? Esau Edom is going to get a taste of his own medicine, man. This is the book of Isaiah 11 and 13. It says, the envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. So ultimately what? That you know, the divisions between the tribes is going to be done away with, man. You know, Judah's not going to look down on the northern kingdom, and the northern kingdom is not going to look down on the southern kingdom, man. But they shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines, right, those Africans. Toward the west, they shall spoil them of the east together. They shall lay their hand upon Edom and Moab, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. Right, so ultimately what? The Lord is going to rouse Jacob. Because how's the Lord, you know, YAHAWASHI rousing Jacob? Hey, by these unjust killings that these Edomites is doing to Jake. The Lord is putting a spirit on Esau Edom, you know, showing his horns to ultimately to get dirty and down on Jake, man. And that's ultimately rousing Jake up, man. And ultimately what? To strike back. And the Lord is going to put a fierce spirit on Jake to ultimately what? To destroy these said heathens in the land, man. And this is what we're witnessing. Both the southern and the northern kingdom coming together, because what? It's not no coincidence that ultimately you had the Nolan Whale situation. And meanwhile, you ultimately have ICE killing, you know, the northern kingdom tribes unjustly, man. So the Lord is going to bring the two tribes together, man. You know, both the southern and the northern kingdom, and ultimately to get busy on Esau Edom and these other nations, man. Because this is where everything is heading towards, man. But, you know, just something I wanted to get into real quick. You know, Lord, when I hope this lesson was edifying, I want to end up by giving all praise, honor, and glory to YAHAWAH, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of great millstone to tell us this truth. And salutations to the hopeful elect that's around the four corners of the globe. Lord, when I hope this lesson was edifying. Until next time, Kwam Yasharallah, Shalom, and a Bible ball. Until next time, Lord willing.